Welcome to this episode of Teacher Nerds Podcast. Today, Joe and Ron are pleased to interview Ira Socol. Ira is a former Chief Technology and Innovation Officer in Virginia. In 2017, he was recognized by the Center for Digital Education with their annual award to the nation's top 30 technologists, transformers, and trailblazers. During doctoral studies at Michigan State, he became a leading national expert in the use of accessibility technology and universal design for learning, where he also developed tool belt theory, an equity lens for all learners. He is the author of numerous journal articles in national education and school architecture journals. Ira is also the author of The Drool Room, a unique novel that forces you to look through his eyes as a dyslexic student growing up in the earliest days of special education. Most recently, he has co-authored Timeless Learning with Pam Moran and Chad Ratliff. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Have you heard about the nerds? What's the word? Teacher nerds. You can tweet them out on Twitter, you can find them on the gram. After listening to their podcast, you'd be sitting there like, BAM! Trying to take the teaching from one level to the next, reaching up to Canada and down to Mexico. Gotta go. Teacher nerds. Start the show.
All right. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Teacher Nerds Podcast. I'm Ron Nober.
I'm Joe DiPaolo.
I'm a technology teacher, 3rd grade to 8th grade.
And I'm in a 3rd grade classroom.
And we are thrilled to death today to have Ira Socol join us as a guest on the podcast. Ira, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation here today. And I appreciate what you guys do to spread the word.
Yeah, that's it, Ira. That's what we're trying to do, get the word out.
Yep, get more people on board. All right, so we just, I think Joe and I, in reading Timeless Learning, one of the things that stuck out to us, for me especially, was, on page 134, you have a quote in there that talks about reading print is no longer an exclusive definition of literacy in a time when so many different technologies for input exist. And it's something I think more schools, more teachers need to be conscious of. And, I think, reading some of your stuff, it really is, something you're passionate about. If you want to maybe talk about a little bit of your background of why it's a passion for you.
Well, this is what really brought me into education and convinced me that I had something important to bring. I was not a good student ever in school, and that includes grad school. I mean, any person who's ever been a teacher or professor of mine could back me up on that. It's reading and writing have never been easy for me. That is, the specific skill sets of using your hands to do things, or you're scanning alphabetical letter forms. But what has driven me is a real love of stories, both hearing stories and telling stories. That's driven me through my life. And I've learned for a very long time how to move around the limitations, even when the technology was a long way from what's available now. So I can go back to the 1980s and describe riding the subway to the New York City Police Academy while listening to law books on a Walkman. Okay. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone, but I did that, and I can go back to books being on, vinyl.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
This is, very, very long time ago. And, but to me, I always wanted what was in the books, and I wanted to tell stories. And so I worked around it. What I always found in education, though, was this bizarre focus that it was more important for you to master a traditional skill than it was for you to use that skill for an actual purpose. So the only reason anybody reads is because they want what's in the book.
Right.
Or want what's in the newspaper or what. So the only reason people write is because they have a story they want to tell that people can reach asynchronously. Well, what we're doing right now is that we're creating something that people can reach whenever they want to.
Right.
And humans have gone through lots and lots of different ways of doing this, starting with cave paintings.
Yep.
The first time somebody moved from telling the story around the fire to painting it on a cave wall, they moved away from, the direct communication to something that others would see and would have to interpret. So what I saw is the traditional forms of education is really working against a very large percentage of kids. And going back into the last century, I began working with new forms of text-to-speech and speech-to-text with students at every age, from like second grade up through, university, and finding ways to get people around these limitations. And of course, at the same time, then trying to convince educators that these alternative methods were legitimate. I don't know why that's such a fight, but
I think
it has been.
One of the things I like in your...
And, what I have always said to people is I've read James Joyce's Ulysses 6 times, but I have never touched a paper copy of it. But I can still go into bars in Dublin and argue the book with anyone there. So I think I've read it. And...
Well, you talk about getting information easily for you, right? And some kids are going to be able to pick up text and decipher those symbols, but not everyone is going to be able to do that. So I thought that was a key point, and it makes me wonder, why doesn't everyone jump on board with this? So it's not saying let's do away with reading altogether, but let's find other avenues. So if kids can't read and get that information quickly, or can't write and disseminate, or to get information out quickly, then there's other means for them avenues, to tell their story and get that information in. And I know, we talked before where you're saying you're trying to get out there in other districts. Like, have you ever tried to talk to the legislators or like the people in power in education to really start from the top and work your way down?
Well, I have done a significant amount, and probably not directly with legislatures, but through state departments of education. And going back to when I was in grad school at Michigan State, I had worked with a team from Scotland who had developed a thing called Access Apps, which was a flash drive that would turn any Windows computer into something that was 98% accessible.
Wow.
That is, it had text-to-speech, speech-to-text, all sorts of different calculators, all kinds of different software on it to help students do anything. And you could put it on a 2 gig flash drive. And that was your only cost because these were all open source.
Wow.
I then, with a grant that actually came from the U.S. Department of Education, adapted this for the United States, getting rid of the Scottish accents and things like that. And we actually had the money to produce these, just, to mass copy them and send them out to any school district in the state of Michigan. And I went around the state working with teachers everywhere on this, and it did a couple of things. First, it provided kids with that kind of direct access. But secondly, it started to prove to people that these limitations were blocking them from seeing what kids were capable of.
That true potential, yep.
Yeah, and we've talked to state superintendents, Pam Moran and I, a number of times in the last year and a half, trying to, spread this word in a way that can filter down. Because one of the things I realized is it didn't matter what I thought the best way to read was, because I have my personal preferences. And even if we go all the way back to the 1990s, I have things that I liked better than other things. When I tried to work with students with that, I realized that they didn't have the same preferences at all. They would choose other things. Just like when people say they have developed a dyslexia font, it's ridiculous, because everyone is sort of individual on that. So what I started working on back then was, what we refer to as tool belt theory, which is that you have to get kids into a situation where they know how to choose and adapt and set up the technologies that will work best for them. And then they have to learn how to learn the next ones that come along, because anything we teach now will be worthless 3 years from now.
Right. So it's almost like you don't necessarily give them a strategy, you give them tools so they can figure things out on their own, and then when they need to do something, they're able to do it on their own without being shown, really you have to do it this way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think go ahead, Ira.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I first came across this. I teach technology, and we were doing an engineering class, and, at the end I asked kids to do a reflection, and I decided, you know what? I want to give them the option of doing Flipgrid as their reflection. And there was a student that we had who was not a great writer, wasn't a great reader. When I saw his Flipgrid reflection on video and him talking about the project, I was blown away by the amount of detail and information that this student put across, that I was like, holy smokes. He really understands it in an unbelievable amount of detail that I never would have gotten from him had I asked him to write it down.
And so many kids are silenced in classrooms with traditional tools because maybe they can't speak well, maybe they can't write well. I always talk about how much I hate icebreaker activities, because very often it'll involve writing something down and showing it to people. Well, if I write something down and show it to people, their first impression of me will be that I write like a 5-year-old.
Right.
And or worse. And that's not the disclosure I want to make. It's kind of like forcing a kid with a bad stutter to get up and speak in front of class.
Right.
It is a problematic thing. And so what I always worked on, where I first started doing this at Grand Valley State University in Michigan or right through Albemarle County, was making sure people had choices.
Yep.
So that in Albemarle County, we chose as our one-to-one device Windows laptops because they allowed the most choices for things to happen there. You could use all sorts of different browsers. You could use all sorts of different speech-to-text or text-to-speech systems, and we would load all those different things on every computer. So it wasn't a question of you needed a diagnosis in order to use this. You could just choose to use it.
Well, that's what Ron and I have been saying. We do some videos and YouTube. YouTube's great because you have an option where you could put closed captioning on. And if you want to be able to read what they're saying, and why do you have to have an IEP for that? If that's what you want to do, if that's how you're going to get the information easier, then the reins are off. If we have it in the classroom, you don't need an IEP to use it.
Right.
Text to speech, especially I'm dealing with 8-year-olds in 3rd grade. So when we're typing something up on the Chromebook after something we just worked with, our topic is slavery and social studies. So when I'm asking them to put something out and they're typing it, they're not going to be able to type it as quick as maybe someone in 8th grade.
Right.
But that doesn't mean, they're not able to get 10 facts down in the amount of time that we have to complete the assignment. So, if I'm not giving everyone text to speech, they're not going to be able to tell me everything they've learned because they're not efficient typers yet. So what am I grading? Am I grading their typing, or am I grading what they've learned in the social studies content?
Well, and if you think about that, I mean, speech-to-text software was not invented for people with disabilities. It was invented for doctors and lawyers who'd been dictating for most of the 20th century to dictaphones and things like that. You know, Rod Serling famously wrote all his, you know, teleplays and screenplays by dictating them. He never wrote or typed anything. What you don't want is the mechanics of writing, whether it's typing. And if I'm on a regular keyboard, I'm a one finger
me too.
person. And have always been that. You don't want those mechanics to slow down the person's thinking process and communication process, because then you are indeed, as you just said, you're measuring something that has nothing to do with what you want to measure.
Right.
And early, and this is probably 1997, I worked with a third grader who had a genetic issue where he could not move his fingers independently.
Okay.
They all did something, or none of them did something. So he couldn't hold a pen, couldn't hold a pencil, and he sure couldn't type. So I met him and I hooked him up with, back then we used IBM's VIA Voice a lot, you know, as a speech to text tool. And he sat there, his teacher said, and he just dictated stuff for a week.
Oh, wow.
He just had all this stuff stored in his brain that he had never been able to get out before. And, you know, that's where you know, create the amazing opportunities. Now, not everybody becomes, I had one young man who could neither read anything nor write his name, but after using, you know, the technologies, ended up getting a PhD in history at Notre Dame.
Jeez.
But not everybody's like that. I used a very sophisticated program called WYNN, W-Y-N-N, which was a text-to-speech system that could read diagrams perfectly.
Wow.
And we use that in all sorts of CTE situations, because where the diagrams were essential, you know, someone learning welding, someone learning plumbing. So it doesn't all have to end up with this huge academic measurement success. You know, my goal is that people be okay, that they live their lives.
Right, and do what they want to do. You know, have the ability at least to do what they want to do, whether, like you said, it's plumbing, welding, getting a PhD in history, whatever it is, that you can do it and you can function.
Well, we've had kids in class that would normally have been written off as they'll never get it, to now we give them opportunities to show what they got, and the kids are superstars who would normally be written off as, oh, you know what? There's nothing you can do for him. He just doesn't get it.
Right.
And what he doesn't get is the way teachers are putting it out. You know, but you
and that stretches to everything. So if you take the traditional classroom chair, I'll guarantee you half the kids are going to be totally uncomfortable, and you're going to generate significant problems in a bunch of them, which is why we moved to saying, you know, every space had to have at least 3 kinds of seating and 3 kinds of desks.
Wow,
and then
great.
We got to the place where we said every child should be able to walk into any learning space and decide where, how, or if to sit.
Yep.
Right.
Because that has nothing to do, your ability to sit in a chair has nothing to do with the learning objectives of school.
Well, and that's the thing I think about, you know, us as an adult. If I'm sitting in a PD day for, you know, 2 hours, I'm getting antsy. You know, like those chairs, those benches, whatever we're sitting on, are uncomfortable.
And no one has them at home around their kitchen table.
Right,
no one's got them in their living room.
Yeah, Joe, the first thing I said to teachers in Albemarle County when I first started working with Pam was I looked, we were sitting in a high school classroom, and I said, does anybody here have furniture like this at home?
So is that where I heard that joke?
That's probably
your
at
joke
Rewire.
What Pam then did was she started holding principal meetings in high school classrooms.
Oh, that's awesome.
And say, so you try it.
Right. Well, and that's one thing I remember from, my grad school was, one of the professors saying, if you need to go to the bathroom and you're an adult here, you get up and go to the bathroom. Why are we making kids wait till this period and you get a bathroom break here? And he said, how well can you focus on what I'm doing if your thought is, geez, I got to go to the bathroom. Geez, I got to go to the bathroom. It's teaching them the skill of, is this a good time to take a break to go to the bathroom, or should you wait a few minutes, until directions are done or something like that? That's a life skill.
If you're uncomfortable, the only thing you're paying attention to is your discomfort.
Exactly.
Right? That's true of everybody.
Yep.
And so we create these preposterous situations where, we want to control everything about a kid's life. And I say one of the things, we never had rules about having food or drink around computers, because if kids look at the teacher, there's food and drink around.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
They know that's nonsense. And in fact, the only liquid damage I ever saw to any of the 20,000 computers we had in Albemarle County was Pam Moran, when somehow she lost control of a bottle of water and it poured completely into the keyboard of her MacBook. It just, kids are careful of things that matter to them, that are important to them. If we just treat them as we would like to be treated, things will go easily. And to go back to the thing about reading and stuff, we sort of switch. Some of the teachers who've been most resistant to the idea that kids will listen to books instead of reading them are the same teachers who are very fond of assigning kids to read Shakespeare. Well, Shakespeare was never intended to be read.
You're intended to see Shakespeare performed, right? I mean, that's...
Right. You're not supposed to read Shakespeare. He would have been shocked,
right,
to think that people were actually reading this stuff, because it's not what's going on. The other thing is that brings allows all sorts of cultural differences in the classroom. Most of the world's societies use community reading strategies where people will gather around and read things together.
Right.
And bring in news. You think about in China, the newspapers that are posted to walls, and,
right,
things like this. But we insist on individual stuff. I'm a huge fan of Irish fiction, but Irish fiction is never really intended to be read. It's to be heard.
Right. It's an oral tradition, right? Like that's...
Yep.
Yeah.
And so you open up all sorts of things and eliminate all sorts of points of conflict when you just relax those expectations.
Right.
Well, this was our Read Across America week. I don't know if everyone around the U.S. celebrates, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
So we've had readers come in, parents, and just read to the kids. And it's great because they all sit around and you never have to say, hey, pay attention. Hey, stop playing around. Because you know what?
Yep.
They just want to sit there and enjoy the story and not have to be like, all right, I'm listening. So there might be a question about this character, and because as an adult, I've never had to read a book and then go answer questions on it, because that's not, you talk about that, like, they don't read just for the sake of reading. It's, I got to read now and do a STEM, or I got to read and answer questions, or now I have to read and think about, what's the summary of this section and what details. I mean, there's so much work that we throw right into reading from kindergarten. And at the last Texpo, they had Katie Martin as the speaker, and she threw up this graphic And I think you talk about it in your one article too, is that these kids come in kindergarten dying to go to school. They can't wait to start.
Right.
And by third grade, that excitement level drops significantly.
Right, it nosedives, yeah.
Up to like third grade. And then by 8th grade in high school, it's totally plummeted.
It's crazy how we turn kids off to all these things. And, even if you're deeply into literature, you have to understand that the kind of questions usually asked in school, because they make easy test questions, really devalue what fiction can be. There's a great, forward to a book, I think, called The Prague Cemetery, and by Umberto Eco. And it's a forward to the English language editions, because he has to say to people in the UK and the United States, do not confuse the plot with what this book is about. Superficially, the plot is what moves the action forward, but it isn't necessarily what the book is about. And the example I always give to people is The English Patient, which is one of the most wonderful novels I've ever read. But if you watch the movie strips it down to the plot.
Okay.
Yep.
Which is emotional, but pretty uninteresting as sort of a love story. When you read the book, what it's about is being a colonial person.
Okay.
Being powerless within your society.
Oh.
And, but that, you don't write a book about that. That becomes a textbook. You
Right.
write a story that illuminates that. And so we move kids away from the common ways of perceiving what a story is telling you. And I mean, I love writing fiction, and I love great fiction writing, and I'm sure that fiction can tell truer stories a lot than nonfiction can, because it can bring you into the emotions of the place. But we have to let kids experience that both ways, both as readers and writers. And if we're constantly trying to figure out what we can do to catch the kids who haven't read the book,
Right.
we're losing the whole point.
Right. And that's, I always, when I'll give an assignment, just, give me a reflection of what we did in this project. And, the first thing I usually get is 3 hands going up. How many sentences do you want? I said, I don't care how many sentences, get your point across. I said, some of the best sentences in a story can be a one word, like that grab your attention and pull you into the story. And it's one word with an exclamation point. I said, I don't want you to just write for the number of sentences and the number of paragraphs. I want you to write to get your point across to me and tell me what you know, or, again, do it in video if you choose to do it that way.
One of my favorite chapters is in the book, Something Wicked This Way Comes, Ray Bradbury. And the entire chapter is one sentence that says, nothing much else happened the rest of the night. They're done.
That's my kind of chapter.
I tell my, when I was teaching in Michigan State, I'd tell my students, they'd ask how long something had to be. And I'd say, if you can get it to me in under 100 words, you're way ahead. If you can make it 50, you're even further ahead.
Yeah.
Right, because you're teaching that you're talking about now, how to be concise. Get to the point.
Get to the point.
You know what I mean? And that's why a lot of times if I'm asking students to do a video, I do limit it to, like, your video, I want it to be, 30 seconds or 60 seconds or 90 seconds, because I want you to learn how to drill down and get to the point of what you're trying to get across.
If you ask kids that, you point out that the ads they see online or on television are usually 30 seconds or less.
Yep.
And they sure managed to get their point across.
Yeah, exactly. Nike knows how to get their point across if they want to,
and probably even quicker than that, because on YouTube, you can skip have that ad in 5 seconds.
Right.
So they really got to get their point in there.
Yeah, that's really good. I never even thought of that.
Right.
But I mean, they do that in 5 seconds, and they want to get your attention in that first 5 because you might skip the ad. I don't know if you've ever. gone or listened to anything from the National Storytellers Convention in Tennessee? Have you? And one of my favorites has got to be Donald Davis.
Yes,
and if you read his work, it's one thing, but if you hear Donald Davis tell the story, it's just completely different, and you are enthralled and hanging on every word.
Because that's an art form, though.
Right? It's an art form,
telling your story.
Yeah, and it's a verbal tradition. That's what he did and does.
Well, and there's I really think we fail to connect kids with this range of media. We've at least gotten lots of school librarians to adopt graphic novels, but
right.
I always ask things like, so what would your canon be of American film?
Okay.
Or British film or French film? What films do you think you'd most want kids to know? What music would you most want them to know? We strip literature down to one meaning, that
right.
It has to be a written thing.
Right. Instead
of, people sang long before they wrote.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's important, I think, to talk about how the range of how humans express themselves, because that gives you your choice. There's a great thing out of New Zealand called Dance Your PhD, which is people who've converted their dissertations into ballet.
Wow.
In science and all sorts of things, they do this. When you think of the realm of human storytelling that we'd like our kids to be good with, you can't just spend 13 years concentrating on printed books.
Right.
And, going the other way, I always talk about the fact, we used to refer in Albemarle County to, not to keyboarding, but to text entry. Because in the world we're in, even right now, we type on big keyboards and on-screen keyboards. We need to use our voice to even control our cars.
Right.
Right. Or the house, right? Your house at home.
Yeah.
Or your house.
Right.
And it was interesting when we started using speech to text heavily, when we had that on our computers, a group of seventh graders at one of our middle schools, and it was a rural southern middle school. So this is not, Bostonian English, right? People are sounding like, but what they said was that using that changed the way they spoke, made them much more accurate, because when you're dictating, you need to nail the ending of words.
Yep.
Right.
To get them right. And, because nobody sets up their voice control in cars for rural southern U.S. voice. So you do have to learn all these different ways to process stuff. I think I just said, Pam and I were in Illinois 2 weeks ago, and, I pointed out to people that, alphabetical text is really good, but not when you're driving a car. There's all sorts of reasons to have to get good at multiple ways of consuming and producing.
Right. It's a
life skill. It's a life skill,
and it's going to be. It's now, with how quickly technology changes, those modalities of communication are going to be changing. Again, who knows? It may be just thought process. 5-10 years from now, where it's not verbal, it's not, and you see it even with some of the technologies for people with ALS. It's, reading your retina moving, and
yes.
There's all kinds of communication, and not being forced into one little box.
15 years ago, I was at Cal State Northridge runs this giant conference on technology and persons with disabilities, and I was testing out early eye gaze technology like that. And they decided that ADHD and eye gaze technology was a very bad combination. They say you have to focus on
right.
Okay. Really, I'm like, but yes, all of these things, I mean, think of how that's opened the world to people.
Right.
And it fights against the nature of, when I wrote a dissertation on the history of education in the United States, and our K-12 system, 1 through 12 at the time, was really designed to fail 80% of children, to get rid of 80% of kids by the time you got to 9th grade in high school. To quote Woodrow Wilson, because we need a lot more coal miners than clerks.
I was going to say, that's your labor force, right? That's what it was looking for.
And so we're still, and the whole idea of grade level expectations was a filtering system, not a push system. It was designed so that most kids couldn't achieve it, which is why, as I always say, it's really funny. If 2/3 of kids in the United States across the board read below their grade level, how is that grade level?
Right. The grade level is below.
We invented this odd
right.
construction.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess kind of going forward, like what I keep thinking about if, companies like, we've seen it, if Blockbuster didn't take on what Netflix was doing, right? Blockbuster failed. Kodak didn't, decided that the world wasn't going to be digital. Nobody wanted to look at their pictures digitally. They wanted to hold them in their hands. Kodak failed. And I was thinking of with reading, when I was a kid, there were these Time Life books of plumbing and electrical work, and nobody would even think about that today. You go to YouTube and you watch a video on plumbing or electrical work. What's the educational system going to be?
Can we ask that again?
Yeah.
I lost you for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was saying was, when I was a kid, Time Life books had this whole series on like house repair, and it was a plumbing book and a electrical. And I said, people would think you were nuts today if you went to your Time Life books to repair your sink. You grab a YouTube video. But what's going to happen to education if we don't adapt? We're setting kids up to fail.
Yep.
If we're not adapting.
Well, we're setting us up to be irrelevant in education, which is, you mentioned Kodak. I often tell people that, in the year 1995, we had this amazing company in the United States that would sell you just about everything and ship it to your house wherever you were. It was called Sears.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean,
the Sears catalog.
Yeah.
I totally
the greatest
forgot
thing.
about that. Yeah.
That was Christmas time, right? That was a tradition.
Right. Sears cut out their catalog a year before Amazon was founded. Somebody missed the point.
Yeah.
Woolworths shut down at the same time that things like Dollar General
came
were
along,
exploding.
right?
It's like people miss. The point is not that we're about teaching people to decode for reading or to teach them this particular book. We're teaching them how to learn and go forward.
Right.
And one of the things that makes me most nervous is that I see like the field my son is in, which is, very high level web database architecture, or Pam Moran's son is with a digital advertising agency, mostly social media. These jobs don't even have places for education on their job applications.
Right.
They don't care, which means we've missed the point.
Right. We're not. You need creativity. You need problem solving. You need an ability to think.
Collaboration. Yeah. Well, I think that's why it's important that we run these passion projects and the Spark projects. So, Ira, like you said, so the kids can learn how to learn.
Right.
Like Ron, you were saying, we wouldn't go to the book, and which, by the way, my dad gave me that time,
Time Life books.
the
how-to series,
how to keep your house up. But like now, I need to take the microwave off the wall. I go to YouTube,
right,
and I watch a YouTube video, and I think it's important to show the kids, you know, I don't care, you know, slavery's not your passion, but you know, we have to do this. But now here's the time. Here's what you're passionate about. Go, you know, watch the videos, put some stuff down, and then sharing it with the world. Those are the skills that are going to keep them prepared for what we call that uncertain future.
Right. And I mean, again, like you were saying, like slavery is not your passion, but even just teaching them to be empathetic towards, you know, the history of slavery or something like it's not about the slavery. It's not about the dates and the measure. It's about being empathetic to a group of people who were ripped from their culture and brought over here. You know, that's what we should be teaching, or that's where the focus should be.
Well, and I think that, you know, when you talk about a subject like slavery, here's the opportunities we're missing. I would love kids in Virginia and kids in New Jersey to talk about this.
Right, because the views are going to be...
There's such a different background to it. You know, it's different for kids here who can still see the plantations.
Right.
You know, and see that whole structure and see that the big old movie theater downtown had the, you know, the entrance around the corner for blacks.
Right.
Yeah, because I guess our guys never see that.
No,
and they are floored when we talk about, you know, there were separate counters and separate drinking fountains and, you know, separate bathrooms and you couldn't sit in the front of the bus. I mean, they're floored. So to be able to hook them up with people that would see that every day.
Right. And you know, one of the more entertaining things I once saw was a group of, I don't know, sort of high school age kids in one of our high schools with Skyping with a classroom in Ireland, and they were trying to explain voting to each other.
Okay.
And it was incredible because neither could understand the others at all, because of course voting is entirely different in the two countries. And what I loved most is when they got onto the question of what democracy was, because the American kids said democracy rules, and the Irish kids said, no, democracy means the majority can't rule. Different societies designed for different things, but in trying to explain this to each other, you saw, you know, this incredible change happen on both sides of things. We also had a group of kindergartners talking to equivalent age kids in Ireland, and it was the week before Halloween, and it was fascinating. The American kids were stunned by seeing the crucifix on the classroom wall.
Oh, right.
Right. The Irish kids were stunned that American kids didn't get the week off for Halloween. It was like the major holiday. But the more we use the technologies we have at the moment, where communication has become almost free,
right,
to link kids across the, across these otherwise big barriers. I was saying to a group of fifth graders here a few years ago who were working on projects about Patrick Henry, and I said, I will connect you to a fifth grade classroom in Michigan, and you can tell them about Patrick Henry. And the teacher said, oh, they'll know that. And I said, no, they won't. And to test it out, I called my son up, who was educated in Michigan, and said, who is Patrick Henry? And he said, I don't know. It's just not. That's Virginia history. Right. Not. But these things, these are another way is when you build these connections that you'll see different kids rise to the top.
Exactly.
Yep.
Because it's kids who think that little bit differently, who make the connections first and then bring it home.
Right.
But that's why I think you have to give those kids a chance to shine, because if you don't do that extra stuff, if you don't do the outside of the 3 R's, you know, you're never going to reach that kid. And I think that kid's never going to have a want to be heard. right? If you're just, what's your reading level? How are you doing on your math facts? That's not too good. What'd you score on the rubric on your last writing assignment? As you start to get beat down more and more, eventually you're like, psh,
yeah, you give up and stop trying.
Right. If I'm always going to be at 2 when I should be at 3s and 4s, why keep doing it? I'm not going to do it. Just score me as a 2 and I'm done.
Right. Score me as a 2, I'm done, and I'm going to disrupt your entire class the whole rest of the time. That's what it's going to be.
Well, and I always talk about, I love teachers who made it very clear that these were the rules, and if you violated them, this would happen, because to me it was a menu. Because the thing I most wanted to do was get out of the classroom.
Right, what's going to get me to the in-school suspension room quickest?
Right, but if you can get me out of school suspension, just tell me what you want me to do.
Right, and I can do that.
I'll be right there with you. If you let kids come in continuous failure mode. I talk about, I'm older than you guys. I talk about reading through what was, the SRA boxes of reading things.
Oh my gosh, I remember those.
Stuck with mud brown and, battleship gray as the colors of the things I was reading, while everyone else was in gold and silver.
Right.
And,
what message are you sending, right? Well, I remember when I was in first grade, it sticks out in my mind so badly that the reading groups, there were the Tigers, the Eagles, the Turtles, and come on, I might be in first grade, but I know the difference between a tiger and a turtle, and I know why this group's the Turtles and why this group's the Tigers. It stuck with me even then.
In fifth grade, I was sent out of the classroom. Me and 4 other kids had to walk to a trailer across the parking lot. We couldn't even be in the class. Right. And that's, we would go over and we took the California Achievement Test, the CAT test. And I can remember being done in probably 10 minutes. First one done. I handed in, the teacher goes, "You got to go back and look this over." I said, "No, I checked everything." She goes, "Well, I'm going to tell you what, every answer's not D, none of the above. You made mistakes. Go back there and do this again." I'm like, "All right, no problem."
People, when you create those sort of rankings, I always talk about bullying doesn't start with kids. Bullying always starts with adults. How are certain kids perceived by the adults in a building? No kid decides at age 5 that football players and cheerleaders are above soccer players,
right.
and, volleyball players, but adults do that. And I still can see it in my mind. Absolutely. My second grade teacher had a bulletin board that looked like an aquarium, and every kid had a fish with their name on it. And you went up in the tank as you read more books. Well, I had a catfish, apparently.
You were a bottom feeder.
It wasn't getting off the bottom. And that kind of public shaming of kids.
Yeah.
I was in a school one time, and the principal, and I think, people are doing this with the best of intentions, but they had these honor roll stickers on all these lockers in a middle school. And I said to her, "Why don't you put the sticker on the rest of the lockers that said not an honor roll kid?" Because that's what you're
right.
doing.
That's what you're doing, right? Basically, right?
And so it's that thing of letting kids see each other as individually valuable. And I think that if the work we did, Pam and I did in Virginia with a whole lot of other people, was best, is that we let this much larger range of children shine and feel at home and feel valued in the schools. And we have lots of stories about that. And it's often the thing of looking around and trying to get a kid into a comfortable place where they could find something to be passionate about, as a route into the learning we wanted them to do.
Yep.
Whether that stuff's important or not is besides the thing. If you're trying to teach velocity to a 6th grader, it's far better to look at, an NFL quarterback throwing a pass, so you have time and an exact distance to figure it out, than it is doing a thing with X in it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah,
so. And that's, I have a fifth grade class, and we 3D print capsules, and they get one Pringle potato chip, and they have to put it in, and we launch it out of an air cannon, and it has to survive the launch. Every time I do that, coming back in from that, the thing that I love the most is that was the best thing I've ever done in school. And it's even just even hearing the air cannon and understanding air pressure, and it's being built up, and you're turning this valve to let the air pressure out. And, we're not sitting down and we're not doing formulas with it, but they're understanding it. And why is there a puff of smoke coming with it when there's no smoke in there and it was just air? And, well, it's because it's now compressed and it's cold. And, it's just amazing that learning without knowing that you're learning, but what then sticks with you because you were interested. We tell
the story a lot of the middle schoolers building, rolling tree houses. And
yeah.
But, the wonder of that was we did that in the 2 weeks before the state test in a school that simply had never been able to get over the 70% threshold in mathematics, and needed this to get accredited. They were, sort of in real trouble. And I had to have this conversation with Pam even about why we're doing this. But the math teachers pointed out that those kids learned the entire year's worth of math curriculum in 2 weeks.
Right, because you're doing it rather than just thinking or reading about it or thinking about it.
Well, it's like going to a tech school, right? Like all those kids that couldn't do the regular schooling, they went to tech schools, and now you see these guys, welders and carpenters that can read and work with numbers better than people with college diplomas,
right?
Because they went out there and they didn't learn things in the classroom, they learned things on the job,
right?
So it was real life skills that they needed to be successful in life.
Yeah.
Well, my son was a math major, which is beyond my understanding, but math and music, which often goes together.
Right.
When he was an undergrad at Michigan State, he did a bunch of tutoring for athletes, and he said he started doing pretty much nothing but coding with them. And he said, because here's the thing, in coding, something either runs or it doesn't.
Right.
In traditional math, it's either right or wrong. If it's wrong in math, you're wrong and you don't care about it. If it doesn't run in coding, you want it to run.
Right. You want to go back and figure that you want to debug, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all those, it's like when we first started giving out one-to-one computers, and teachers would say, well, what's the punishment for kids forgetting to bring their computer to class? And I'd say they have to go walk back to their locker and get it.
Right.
And they'd say, well, what if that's better for them than being in class? And I said, well, that would indicate a different problem.
Yeah. Right.
My son loves a show, The Office, and he can sit there and tell us lines and who said it and seasons, and I respond with, you know what, why are you getting an 83 in math when you can sit here and tell me? And Ron's response was, well, maybe if the math teacher was as interesting as The Office, he might pick more up. And I said, no, Ron, that's not the right answer. But you know what, as you start to think about it, math, I'm not a math person, so math has always been a struggle for me. That's why I think I'm teaching math at third grade. I think that's my best subject to teach because I've always had such a problem with it. So
right.
I feel as if I can empathize with these kids.
Right. And that's been
my son. He was in middle school. I remember him saying to me one day, he was in minor league baseball, before Little League, and he said, I don't understand. He said, I've seen you try to subtract a 2-digit number from a 2-digit number and end up with a 3-digit number. He said, but on the other hand, you seem to know everyone's batting average on the team updated as of their last at bat. And I said, because I care about one.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Well, and that's, I think, like, I wasn't a math person either, but when I became a teacher and I started to teach myself the math that I needed to teach, I started to get more into it and more excited about it, because I was like, oh, wow, this really does make sense. And there's an actual purpose for it other than, a timed multiplication test. Like, there's a reason to do multiplication, like you can figure out an area of a room and, all these things. And when you show that, then there's more of an interest in it, a more of a reason for it. Yeah. I got to say, I've been, this has been awesome. I feel like we're just kind of sitting at a bar having a conversation.
Yeah. That should be the next one, Ira. That should be the next show.
That's right. Well, it's like, of all the versions of the book Ulysses I've ever listened to, there's one on called LibriVox. That's sort of the audio version of Project Gutenberg. And the whole book is read in bars, every chapter in a different bar.
Oh, wow.
You have all those noises around you and stuff, and you really start to appreciate it. I think, that's another thing we don't let kids do enough, which is talk to each other.
Right.
And, communicate and sit around. And not everything has to go in a linear order, and faster is not always better. I try to convince teachers to never say, if you finish this early, you can do whatever you want, because then you're penalizing kids who can't.
Right.
Much better to say, keep going.
Right. Well, I give add-ons. Here's add-ons you can try if you finish, And it's funny. We sent out a tweet as the teacher nerds today, just about, I said, if a teacher didn't get a prep in their day, they would be freaking out. That moment to decompress. But we require the kids to have bell ringers from the time they go in till the time they, for me, what I do is when you come in, let me take attendance 2-3 minutes, relax, take a breath, talk to your friend, sit back, just breathe a little bit, close your eyes, daydream a second. It doesn't have to be work from the second you come in till the second you leave. Like
one
self-care.
Of my favorite middle school teachers, language arts, 7th grade, built in the first 15 minutes of her 80-minute block is just maker playtime with Legos and this and that and all this stuff. And she said, kids, and especially in middle school, they come in from a hall. You have no idea what's just happened in the hall in the class before with this or that. You got to let kids just chill.
Yeah.
Kids need that time. And one of my early things in special ed stuff was trying to get schools to give ADHD and kids on the spectrum the first period off. Because I said the process of getting up and getting to school is incredibly painful for these kids.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You need to let them chill out. And if they need to leave your room at some point, that's a good decision on their part.
Right.
Better have them go take a walk and come back than, destroy the classroom.
Well, and you figure letting them go and coming back might be 3 to 5 minutes, where, so they might miss 3 to 5 minutes worth of content, where if they're staying there and they're frustrated, that could be 20 or 30 minutes or half the more, how much are they going to miss? Yeah.
Yeah, or 20 to 30 minutes that now the entire class isn't getting to do what they need.
Right.
Because you're dealing with one kid and they're disrupting the entire class. Yeah.
We also talk a lot about how kids need at least the parent privacy. And there's this interesting thing, because no, we can't let kids sort of run free range, because we do have certain things in this country that make that difficult. But it's very hard to go through an entire day in public, which is what our students do.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
meaning like they're always on, right? They're like on public, like, so there's always they always have to be performing, or they always have that mask on.
Yep. Yeah.
Which can be very difficult for some kids. It's actually difficult for a lot of kids, but we'd say if kids can sit in a place where it's not obvious you can see them, they're fine. They don't need to actually be in a separate room. They just need to be in a place that's a little separated. And the Brits have done a great job of this in what they call adolescent playgrounds, where it'll have sort of like a grid that's for climbing, but it also sort of shields kids who are on one side of it a little bit from the surface. So, it's the whole idea is that we don't treat our teachers very well. That's bad enough, but we treat our kids worse. And what I'd always say when we would do multi-age classrooms with more than one teacher, the first thing I'd say to teachers is, you get to go to the bathroom anytime you want. Well,
yeah. Nobody understands that unless you're a teacher. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I had first period prep and I did lunch duty. So it wasn't until 3:15 that I got to go to the bathroom. That's what I'm talking about.
Or someone that comes into work and spends the first hour drinking coffee and looking through emails. If I want to drink coffee for an hour and delete emails, I got to come in an hour before the kids.
Right.
Like, there's no starting my day at 8:30 and saying, all right, guys, give me about a half an hour. I'll be right with you.
Right. Mr. DePaulo's going to chill for an hour. You just do what you talk amongst yourselves.
Amuse yourselves.
Well, it's all about being more humane.
Right.
In everything we do in the buildings. And, when I work with principals, when I still work with principals, I start at the very beginning. When a kid gets off the bus or gets dropped off in their car, what are the things they see? I beg schools not to have 100 no signs at the entrances.
Yeah.
That's a really negative way to start.
Right.
But I even ask, think about this. If a kid gets off the bus every day and walks the same route to their classroom at the same time, what are they learning during that period? They're learning nothing.
Right.
This has turned into an automaton kind of thing. It's important for us to think about that everything kids see, hear, taste, smell in school impacts them in some significant way. And we need to look a lot more carefully at our environment and think about what it is we're saying to kids. I remember saying to a principal in Alamo County who had a big Enter to Learn sign in the lobby, I'd say, do you have a sign that says stop learning when they leave? What's the message here?
Right.
This should be part of their life. It shouldn't be separated from it.
Right. Right. Learning is just throughout the day, right?
Learning
every
shouldn't
experience.
Stop. It shouldn't start when you walk into school, and it shouldn't
Right.
stop when you walk out. It should be a continuous process throughout the day.
It should be you learn when you wake up. You're learning. When you go to bed, you stop for those 8 hours or whatever it is. That's what we should be kind of facilitating. Yeah.
And so I've often talked that I think the most valuable homework would be to explain something they learned to someone in their family or community. Yep. Spread the education. Don't rehash it, but spread it.
Right.
Right. In your own words, tell somebody what happened.
What happened today in reading?
Yep.
What happened today in writing?
Yeah. All right. Well, all right. We've taken up about an hour of your time. I felt like it went by like 20 minutes.
Like it was like sitting at a bar, just hanging out and talking about education.
We were Joe said earlier. I mean, we really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us.
And your message, right? I mean, you've changed the way
we teach.
We've and even look at education.
Right. And you've influenced teachers around us. Through us, that influence is filtering around our school as well.
Well, this is a group effort to change something that's been locked in place for way too long.
Right.
And I use the quote a lot. I think it's in the book. Hard to remember anymore, but from William Alcott, who wrote in 1832 that we too often, prioritize our own comfort and wants over that of our children.
Yeah.
And if that was true in 1832, it's way true now.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
And it's going to take a whole mass movement to turn this education system around, but it's absolutely worth it. I think education is the most important thing we have because it determines our future.
Right.
It's also the most political thing we have because it determines our future.
Okay.
But I'll also say to everybody here, because I think this is important, teachers save more lives every day in this country than doctors do. There goes on in every school, at every level, every place, some moment where a teacher turns a kid's life around.
Right.
I can describe the moment when a teacher did that for me in ninth grade. And he simply told me that my voice might matter to people.
Right. Especially, like you said, you had been kind of, weren't the best student and, all that up until that point. Yeah.
Right. So I think people need to appreciate where we are, but I think the responsibility that falls on us in education, it is massive. But what I found is, once people start thinking about what they're doing, things do change. Things are changing.
Right.
This is not static.
Yeah. There's definitely change. There's a group effort going on, and it is spreading, little by little, classroom by classroom.
Right. And I think as teachers, the only thing we can do is keep shouting it out, like, yo, this is what we're doing, and not to, because we don't want to upset anyone, but, not to say if you're still doing things the way maybe people ran classrooms in the 80s, things are changing. And if your style of teaching, if, like Don Wettrick says, if you're teaching the same lessons year after year for 20 years in a row, it's, it's a problem. You're doing a disservice to those kids because every year things are changing, and the way things are changing now with technology, it's moving it's a million miles an hour.
Right. If your lesson plans are copy and paste from the previous 5 years, there's an issue.
We also know that we as humanity know a million times more about the human brain than we knew in the year 2000.
Exactly. Yeah.
Our knowledge, that change in knowledge, if we're not applying it, it's like if doctors didn't apply improved knowledge of the heart.
Right.
We have to take advantage of what we know now that we didn't know before.
And it's hard work, and I think people or teachers need to know, like, going into it, it is hard, and it's not good. Teaching doesn't just happen between 8:15 and 3:15 or whenever your bells ring. There's work that goes into it, and I think that's what it's important work, and it's worthwhile, because at the end of the day, like you were saying, you reach that one kid, and like that's you reach one kid a year. To me, that's worth it, because maybe that's one kid you wouldn't have reached or that wouldn't have gotten it. And, I love hearing questions from parents. Well, what happens, Mr. DiPaolo, if my son or daughter doesn't have a teacher like you next year? And I say, well, I don't have any control over that. But what I do have control over right now is you and your son and building them up to say, you know what, I can do this. And then to hopefully build that confidence to say, talk to a teacher, it's just another adult and saying, hey, listen, I can't do it this way, but could I try and do it this way? And in past classes, I've been successful doing it like this. Can I try and do it like this in your class?
Yep.
You're absolutely right. If you can teach kids to advocate, but I'll tell you, the fact that the future might be bad is never a reason to make a kid's present bad.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just not what it's about. I'm going to have to go only because I need to walk the dog.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this.
Hey, Ira, if you're ever in Jersey, Ron and I you get in touch with us, and if it's you and Pam,
you got dinner on us.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Where are you in Jersey?
We're right near Tabernacle where Glenn Robbins was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
I know you guys are coming in March, right? March 31st.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't quite get to that, but yeah,
that's okay. Hey guys, thanks very much.
Hey, thanks, Ira.
Thanks, Ira.
Nice talking to you.
Yep. Bye bye.
Take care.
All right. So.
Ooh, Ron, man, that was heavy.
That was I mean, it really did feel like 15, 20 minutes.
I'll tell you what, the last time I looked up at the clock, it was 20 after 4.
Right.
Dude, it's 10
it's
to
10:05. Yeah. That was pretty amazing. So, Joe, that was a great episode. And again, got to say thank you to Ira for taking that time out.
And Pam,
Pam setting it up and facilitating it.
It was Pam's idea. Hey, why don't you guys reach out to Ira?
Yeah.
And then I think, seeing Pam at Texpo all those years ago, Pam and Don, that started kicking it off for us.
Yeah.
And
that's
here
what
we
started
are,
to change
3
things.
or 4 years later.
Yeah.
And think about how much our teaching has changed.
Right. Our teaching has changed. We have a podcast. We're trying to spread that word now. So thanks everybody for joining us once again.
I'm Joe DiPaolo, and I hope you enjoyed this as much as Ron and I did.
If you didn't, sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm Ron Nober. We are the Teacher Nerds. And Joe, that's Nerds with a
Z, Ron.
All right. So check us out on teachernerds.com. Check us out on Twitter at Teacher Nerds. Joe on Instagram.
Teacher Nerds Podcast, Ron.
All right. And check out the Teacher Nerds store on teachernerds.com. Get your Teacher Nerds swag. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Teacher nerds knocking on your door. Open up, let's take your teaching further than before. Give it a try, don't be shy, there's nothing there to lose. Worst thing that happens, kids get pain on their shoes. We're talking teacher nerds. I'm talking teacher nerds.